Hey guys, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. Life from the perspective of a military family member is way different than a civilian standpoint. Military children and family members give up their hopes and dreams to be able to stand by and support their service member, and it isn't an easy lifestyle for anyone to live. I hope that this podcast is able to help connect the military community and give others just a glimpse into what the military life is like from the perspective of spouses and children. Hi everyone, welcome back to a new episode of Grace of a Military Child and Life. Today I'm here with Army spouse and also podcast host Samantha. So welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hey, thank you, Gracie. It's super awesome to be here. I'm so glad to be a part of your podcast. I love what you're doing. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you. So kind of just give me just some insight into your life of being a military spouse.
Yeah, so I've been married for 4.5 years now. And really prior to my husband and being in the Army world through him, I had no experience in the military world. So that was a very eye-opening, just dating him and being aware of the Army world and the acronyms alone will get you. So it can be very overwhelming. He was Army Reserves and he is now an active guard in the reserves. So that's really what I've known throughout my military experience. We went through a deployment when we had just been dating for about 5 months. And then he was went on a 9-month deployment to Afghanistan. And then he came back and we quickly got engaged, I think about 6 months later, and got married within 5 months. So within that first year back, we were engaged and married. And then he just got back from his second deployment back in September of 2022. And he had been gone 2 weeks shy of a year. So in that deployment, we had our 15-month-old son, and I had just entered my 3rd trimester when he left for that year-long deployment. So wow. I gave birth to her during that time, and he did not meet her until she was 9 months old. So I had a long time of solo parenting, which was wonderful and overwhelming and really just all the things. So that's really my experience with in the short version of being in the military world.
Yeah. And, my dad was Army Reserve. So, it's in a sense comforting to hear, a lot of people think Army Reserve or, AGR or National Guard or whatever. And they're like, oh, deployments aren't a thing for you guys. Like, no, it is more of a thing for us than it is, complete active duty. For some reason, your part-timers are the first ones sent out. But that's just the way it goes. And, it'd be that way, but
it's interesting because my husband's got a couple buddies from flight school, and I met them a couple years, and he was gearing up for the second deployment, and they've been in just as long as him. But they've been active duty, and he's been in the reserves, and they've never been deployed, nor were they gearing up for deployment. And my husband was gearing up for a second. I was like, wait, this seems backwards. I don't understand.
Yeah. And then, having a child, in the middle of a deployment, and that sounds insane as it is.
Yeah, that was definitely an experience. We knew when we found out that we were pregnant with her that he would not be able to come home. And so I kind of went in. It took a couple weeks, probably even a month for me I was really scared. I was really nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine giving birth without my husband there. I never imagined in my mind, even being a military spouse, that would be something that I would do. And what's interesting is when I checked into the hospital with our son, which my husband was home for, the woman that checked in ahead of me was a military spouse. And she was going in, checking in, and her sister was with her. And I remember telling my husband, I was like, never, I am never doing that. Don't you ever leave me during deployment. Yeah. And then here I was. So, I never expected that I would go through that. And it was definitely an experience. I mean, just leading up to when I'm 7.5, 8 months pregnant and I have a 15-month-old at home, and just lifting him and doing all the daily things. Even that got overwhelming and exhausting. So thankfully we have a ton of support where we are. And so my mom was over quite a bit, and that helped a ton. My mom and sister went to the hospital with me, and then my husband was able to FaceTime in. He had just gotten overseas like 5 days prior. So I think he was still adjusting time-wise, but he took the day off and was able to FaceTime from the time I checked into the hospital until maybe like an hour after she was born.
Yeah.
So that was nice.
Technology has come such a long way. And, even just the past 10 years that, we're able to have the FaceTime, we're able to have, back, when I was a military kid and my dad was deployed, we never got the chance to do it, but Skype was, that was first coming out and being big. But now we have FaceTime, we have Zoom, we have so many different means of communication that even though he's in another country, he was still able to be there, for that moment and be there for you.
Yeah. I often think how it was prior to having that I've only known deployments in the military life with technology. So I often think of what it would have been like without technology, and just waiting for letters to be written, or, the anticipation and the worry. I can only imagine. It's also, I've talked about this before with other military wives. I was like, I wonder, if having that technology sometimes makes it harder, not so much on the family, but on the soldier, because that's also so much of a weight and expectation of them to be able to be included in the home life, and like what a gift that is. But also their minds are in like two different places. They're in the middle of a war zone, but they're also can be present with their family. So I'm like, I'm sure it comes with pros and cons, but it's wonderful to be able to see their face and hear their voice, and continue to talk to them. So
yeah,
I'm grateful to be on this side of technology.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, like you were saying, pros and cons. You have to find the balance, between having it versus not having it. When are good times, because, when my dad was in Afghanistan, that's 13 hours ahead, I believe, something crazy like that. And so having different time zones, being able to, or having to figure that out, but still being able to be connected with your family, it's definitely a weird balance that you have to figure out, but it's so, there's so much good that comes out of it.
Yeah, especially for kids, I would think too, and spouses, but especially for young kids, like my son, we can explain to him, he has no concept of time. So I'm like, I can't explain to you that he's going to be gone for 11 months, and the countdown and saying it's going to be this many months. He doesn't understand that. So, being able to see dad on a screen for months and months and months, he just kind of got used to that. And at the beginning, he kind of thought it was like a video or something, and he wasn't super engaging. And then he realized, like, no, that's my dad. I'm talking to him. And so I feel like, kids are super resilient, but definitely going through a deployment with kiddos, even little young kids. It was such an honor and also overwhelming to get through. But yeah, it was really cool to see him and how he our son, how he adapted to getting to be in a relationship with his dad via technology.
Yeah. And it changes, and it's so hard for kids to understand that. Like you were saying, like, it's not just a video, it's like an actual like phone call. Like your dad is on the other side of this phone, like having a conversation with you. And I think it kind of stems back to, a feeling of shyness and things like that. 'Cause you're like, well, what do I even do? Like, what is this? What's going on?
Yeah.
And kids don't know, but like you said, they're so resilient. Like military kids are just, being one myself, I'm a little biased, but you
all are.
Yeah, military kids are so resilient. They're so, they're able to adapt to any situation. And some kids, it might take a little longer for them to adapt to something, but they still find a way to adapt to it. And it's really incredible and really inspiring.
Yep. It's definitely a very unique lifestyle to have. And I feel like you only truly get it if you're in it. And those on the outside kind of look in and are like, oh, I'm curious as to what that's like. So yeah. So it's definitely a unique lifestyle.
What kind of things do you experience going through the lifestyle as a spouse?
So I would say the reserves, being in the reserve world is probably very different than active duty because we don't live on a base. We're not completely surrounded by military families.
Right.
Being in the reserves, my husband's unit is 40 minutes away. So other people live, within an hour or even farther away. So we're all not around each other as much. During deployments, we definitely come together and, create our groups during deployments and have that support of the other military spouses. But when there aren't deployments going on, it's an interesting world because everybody else kind of has their groups and friend groups and stuff that they hang out with. So
right.
I've actually been curious of that for a military spouse, a military family that lives on a base or on post, and what that looks like. So, so I'm being surrounded by family. I would say one of the hardest things is kind of like I was saying, it's hard to understand this role and this life when you're not in it. So family so badly wants to understand and be a part of it and support, and they're wonderful, but it's not like talking with another military spouse. And for you, like being a military child and talking to another military child, and there's just that basic understanding of like, hey, yeah, I know what you've gone through. And to have those relationships, I've realized how genuine, how needed those relationships are. I think sometimes in the military spouse world, it can be intimidating meeting other military spouses, especially if theirs have been in longer.
Right.
So I think kind of breaking that down, just being like, hey, military spouse to military spouse, like we can just connect on that level, regardless of what our spouse's ranks are, or what the situation is, or how many times with PCS or any of that. So thinking, not carrying that with us and just having that base layer of common ground is really important in meeting other military spouses. And then finding other families that are similar to ours with young kiddos and older kiddos. So it's definitely been an experience, and I enjoy it.
Yeah. And it's so different. I mean, like you were saying, being a reserve family, we were 20 or 40, 45 minutes outside of my dad's unit. We were, we lived in a suburb of Cleveland and they were in Twinsburg. So it was quite a drive. And obviously, it's not necessarily a crazy commute for the service members all the time, especially because they're not there as frequently. Mm-hmm. When you move and you're on a base, you're there because of, proximity to your work and things like that. And there are people who are in the office every day, so that does not change, even in reserve families. But it's so important to even find that sense of community and that sense of family and, military family within that, even though you maybe 40 minutes this way and there's a family an hour the other way from the unit. So it's still important, still special, still very much needed as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. And it's so important, again, coming from a military kid, but to be surrounded by other people who are going through the same situations, because kids don't understand, the hardest thing for me being a military kid was my dad was going on a deployment, but there were no other military kids in my school. So it's like they don't understand. And the days that I'm sad because I don't have my dad there, someone would come in and say, I'm sad because my dad's going away for the weekend. And I'm like, my dad's going away for a year. It's a little different. So having that, again, basic level of understanding between everyone, no matter, kids, spouse, no matter the rank, just military families have that level of understanding everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's so special and I love it.
Yeah, it is. It is very special. It's very unique, and we're like halfway to 20. So we'll see if we make the whole 20. we will see.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to take it one step at a time because, I mean, you honestly never know what happens. For us, it was unfortunate of my dad getting injured, so we didn't make it to our full 20. Yeah. But, different opportunities come up. You can live, in other states. You have so many different experiences that the military provides that, being active or being, AGR or being reserve, like you never know just the different opportunities that'll come up and along the way.
Yeah, for sure. We are gearing up for our first PCS. So I'm very curious as to how that's going to go with our 2 kiddos, and coming from a place of full support, having both of our families here, to moving to somewhere far away and not having any support is a little overwhelming, but we're also super excited for the adventure and just leaning into that military lifestyle, completely. And so, yeah, we'll see how that goes. I am curious because our kids are so close with the family here, how they are going to do. And again, being so young that I can't really explain to them. I was like, hey, I told our 2.5-year-old, hey, we're going to go live closer to the beach. And he goes, okay. And then 15 minutes later, hey, after nappers, we go to the beach. And I was like, no. Like, it's going to be months down the road. Yeah. So, yeah, it'll be an adjustment for sure, but also an adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you talk to an active duty military family and they're like, you've never PCS'd before? And it's like, no, we are a bit different. But then you talk to a reserve family and you're like, oh, we're PCSing. They're like, oh, you actually PCS.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I definitely see people. I don't know how families do it from like day one military and like moving every 3 years consistently for 20 years. I think it has its pros and cons too. For me, I liked that we have been here and that we've been able to stay in our hometown for so long. So now I'm to the point where like, okay, we're excited for a move, but I think it would be so hard to move every 3 years for 20 years or, even more than that, because then there's all the training and everything too. Yeah. So yeah, it's, we will see how it goes. It's hard finding the right people to contact and the right people to talk to, and Instagram's super handy for that, and finding resources and Military One Source. So, really leaning into those when I haven't really had to utilize those in my reserve experience. Yeah, being a military spouse. So, it's definitely an adventure with a lot of questions that hopefully will be answered, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the beginning, like I had mentioned, you are a fellow podcast host as well. So give us a glimpse into that.
Yeah. So I started a podcast back in December. It's called Pursuing Joy Podcast. It was really on my heart to do for years and years, to share my faith, and I'm a Christian. So I really wanted to do that. I didn't know how. I thought about doing something kind of based in the military spouse life, but I was like, I don't think I want to just be siloed down into one. So we kind of talk about a range of topics. I had guests on and really just talking about pursuing joy in life. And yeah, the joy that God gives us when we love God and love other people. So that's really what my podcast is about, is encouraging other people to love others and to just kind of accept that joy that we feel inside. I feel sometimes people might think that that's a bad feeling, or that we're selfish because we feel good because we did something. I'm like, no, that's a gift. Like, that's what we were created here, to love other people. And so yeah, that's what my podcast is all about, that, and having a chance to interview other people with different backgrounds and stories, and I've done an episode on grief, so kind of talking on uncomfortable topics too, but pursuing joy through those. So I'm 13 episodes in, and I really enjoy it. It's definitely a lot of work, especially with two little ones, but it's really enjoyable. And just in the beginning stages of that, and kind of going, I plan to continue doing it as we move and travel. So I'm trying to give myself grace for that, because I'm sure that will be a little interesting. But yeah, so just trying to find a pace with it. But yeah, that's what my podcast is.
Yeah. And, there's so much joy that comes out of this lifestyle too, because you get to meet new people, you get to travel, you get to go new places. And even though while moving out of your hometown is uncomfortable and challenging in its own ways, it is, you find so many incredible things. And you said you're going to the beach. So, going and experiencing somewhere else that, has different perks to it, because if you stay in one area for so long, it can get frustrating. It can get hard. But, going out, being adventurous, exploring, other places, and being able to show your kids other places as well as they grow up.
Yeah. And that's something that we've definitely taken into consideration. Just that lifestyle for our kiddos, even if it's temporary, or if we do that for the next 10 years. So it's definitely something we take into consideration. And my husband has a cousin, and I actually chatted with her before we decided to sign up again for my husband too. And I talked to her kiddos who are like middle school aged, and asked them how they like the lifestyle. And I was like, do you ever wish that you were in one place for like a long time? Because they move every 3 years. And
yeah,
they're like, no, we love it. And they're homeschooled and they love it. They're thriving. They're super outgoing. They get involved in all these different activities outside. And so for me, that made me feel so much better. I was like, okay, that's what I needed to hear. I needed to hear that you enjoyed it. And I feel like our kiddos are very outgoing kids. And so hopefully that will be a positive experience for them. And again, they're so young and they're not going to remember some of this. And they may not remember, some of this next PCS location. So who knows? But I think that's also part on the parents' job as well, is to get excited about. And that kind of goes for all of life with kids. But if you want them to be excited about something, then you need to be excited about it too. So if I just sat around and complained about it, it was like, oh, I don't want to go. I don't want to go out there. They probably would feel the same way. But,
right.
Yeah. So we try to have them share in the excitement too.
Well, and I feel that unless you've lived the life of a military kid and raising military kids yourself, it's hard to gauge what the lifestyle is like. And so you have to talk to people and understand the lifestyle of a military kid. And so talking to, these older military kids who have grown up in it, who have seen, so many different aspects of it, and say, hey, what are your experiences? What are you going through? What are, some of the challenges? Because let's be real, everything comes with a challenge. And military kids are so resilient, like we were saying, that they're going to take the challenge head on and, find ways to adapt to whatever situation they're in, because it's so important as a family as a whole to adapt to wherever you're at, and being like the locals of wherever you're going to be going, and just experiencing it from that perspective as well.
Yeah, I think that will be key, and something we've debated on. There's not a base where he's going to be at, where my husband will be stationed at, but there's an Air Force base nearby. So I'm like, but it's a longer commute. So I'm like, do we live on base, or do we experience we're going to California, the California lifestyle, and live with and get involved in the community and all that. So we're kind of leaning towards that, but that is to be TBD still, I guess, because I think that's the craziest part of PCSing is he has training to do prior to us getting to California. So like we're packing up our house and everything and not knowing what house we're moving into. So there's a lot of control or want for control. And I'm definitely like type A planner that I have had to release since being a military spouse, because the Army really rules a lot of that. So I've just kind of had to like kind of let go and be like, okay, this is out of my control. I can't control this. We're just going to have to be flexible in this. And this is, I mean, I've experienced that through both deployments. But definitely with this move as well. And we haven't even moved yet. So
yeah.
It's,
yeah. The biggest thing is, sitting around and waiting, because that's the only thing you can plan for, honestly.
Yeah. Hurry up and wait.
Yes.
We get very good at that as being children and spouses of military members.
Yeah. Because like you said, the Army has control, whatever branch that you're serving in. They're the ones who say, hey, nope, this is what you're doing. And then they, sometimes 2 weeks before, they're like, oh, we're changing that. So sorry.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The last minute changes always get me. At the beginning, I think I kind of fought a little bit. I was like, that makes no sense. What is going on? Why would they do that? Can you find out more information? And then afterwards I was like, yep, this is just how it is. Yeah. So now other people ask me those questions, well, why is that going on? I'm like, I don't know. It just is. And that's what I got.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I always like to ask is, what advice would you give to another military spouse?
Ooh, be patient. That's something that I've kind of had to grow into. Be patient and don't be scared to hide in the military lifestyle, to be consumed by it, but to really break out within it and, rock whatever role that you are in the military world, whether, it's a spouse or a kiddo. To really realize what an honor it is to be in that role, to support a military service member, because they are living for something so much greater. So to be that spouse, to be able to support my husband in that way, it can be really frustrating at times, because there's so many changes. There's so many things that are out of my control. There are so many things that are missed, events, birthdays, anniversaries, you name it. So instead of getting caught up in that, to just be patient, to really grow in my role as a spouse and encourage other spouses to do the same. It's a very humbling role, and it's very unique and very wonderful if you allow it to be. So just encouragement to not stay stuck in it, to also pursue things that bring you joy, things that bring you happiness, and that fill you up too, as you're pouring yourself out to your service member. Because sometimes we can get lost in that, especially if you are a fellow mommy. That's really hard. You're pouring yourself out for your spouse and for your children, and to not get lost in that, but find hobbies and things that you love to do. So I think that'd be my advice.
Absolutely. And where can people connect with you and find your podcast?
So I have a Facebook, Pursuing Joy with Sam, and then my Instagram is pursuingjoy.podcast. And my email is Samantha@pursuingjoypodcast.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Samantha, and sharing, your experience as a military spouse.
Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for doing this podcast. I had a great time.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Grace of a Military Child and Life. Make sure to set a reminder for every Tuesday to listen to a new episode. You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Grace of a Military Child and Life. If you have any questions or want to be on the podcast, send a message to one of our social media platforms or email grace.of.a.military.child@gmail.com. See you next week.